Today is Monday, 25th of January 2021. The time is 8 p.m. in Canberra. We will begin the weekly Bangla radio program from Canberra 2XX Community Radio Station. This program is being broadcasted by the courtesy of Community Broadcasting Foundation Limited and Bangladesh Australia Association in Canberra. Every Monday at 8 p.m, this program is broadcasted on FM 98.3 MHz. Tonight the program is presented by me, Adiba Ahmed, and me, Admin Zahid. Tonight's program will discuss 2021 Australia Day, some controversies, as well as some influential Australians from history. Australia Day is the official national day of Australia. It's observed every year and it marks the anniversary of the 1788 arrival of the First Fleet at Port Jackson in New South Wales. In present-day Australia, celebrations aim to reflect the diverse society and landscape of the nation and are marked by community and family events, reflections on Australian history, official community awards and citizenship ceremonies that welcome new members of the Australian community. Some Australians regard Australia Day as a symbol of the adverse impacts of British settlement on Australia's Indigenous peoples. Some Indigenous figures and others continue to label Australia Day as Invasion Day, and protests occur almost every year, sometimes even at Australia Day events. Each year, there are discussions around changing this date in order to be more considerate towards Indigenous peoples and their history, but this change is yet to occur.
That's a little bit about the history of Australia Day, and now kind of coming to the very present and 2021. And it is the beginning of the year, so we want to say a Happy New Year as well as Happy Australia Day. But I think it was a very kind of it was an iconic New Year for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons that some people might not be aware of was the fact that we got a new national anthem. Well, the wording of the national anthem, Advance Australia Fair, was changed to reflect the country's Indigenous past. So the government and the Prime Minister backing a change of wording in the second sentence from "We are young and free" to "We are one and free." And my initial thinking, I didn't understand the deeper meaning behind this change. From there, I was thinking, okay, it's one word, but that one word, what it actually was after kind of reading into it a bit more. Australia itself, since when we became federated, it's only been 100 or so years, a bit more, and that's where the word young came from, and the association of where we're a young nation. Australia itself is quite young in comparison to kind of other British colonies, but we kind of failed to recognise the fact that Indigenous people have been living here on Australian land for thousands and thousands of years. So this saying that we are young and free can be quite hurtful to Indigenous people who have been living here for years and years. So this change of wording to "we are one and free," it's quite symbolic of Australia's move to give more recognition to our Indigenous people and acknowledge the kind of history that is behind Australia as well, and to do that in the national anthem, which gets played on a world stage, it is quite important. So I just wanted to make that note as well.
I think that's really great. I think when I heard about the change, I was only kind of listening to some media bites, and so I couldn't understand the significance of changing just the sort of one word in this phrase. But after listening to it from Admin, to hear the reason why the word young is hurtful, it makes a lot of sense, and I think that's really beautiful.
The words came into effect from the 1st of January 2021 is when the new national anthem came into effect, and so many Australians have kind of come out and congratulated the Australian government and welcomed this change. So I think Kathy Freeman tweeted, "What a way to start the year. A phone call from our Prime Minister to say that we are one and free. Thank you." So I think it's a really beautiful sentiment to start the year off with.
But 2021 is not yet without its controversy.
Of course, with every Australia Day there comes lots of controversies, and this year didn't fail to deliver. The first controversy that came into my head, I'm a cricket fan.
This is very big golly of you. I love this.
I'm a cricket fan, but yes, I do watch the cricket, and I went to a Big Bash game on Monday, actually, between the Hobart Hurricanes and the Sydney Thunder, but that's another conversation. So that's the
I
Big
think
Bash
our
League.
states have, our states have cricket teams.
Yeah, it is a lot smaller, but it's called the Big Bash League. But one big move that's come out of the Big Bash League, actually this year and this Australia Day, is so there's always an iconic match played on Australia Day, and it's called the Australia Day kind of Big Bash match, or well, it has the word Australia Day in the promotions of it. However, this year, Cricket Australia has come forward and removed Australia Day, the words Australia Day, I guess, from all of its promotions. And this is supported by a lot of the players and kind of Cricket Australia as an entity itself. But to that move, our Prime Minister Scott Morrison has come forward and said, and I quote, "I think a bit more focus on cricket and a bit less focus on politics would be my message to Cricket Australia." So his kind of thinking was, well, the words of Australia have always been in the heading, why change it now? And of course the move to remove Australia Day from the wording and the promotions around that Big Bash Day match was to acknowledge the fact that Australia Day itself is quite a horrid and quite just a horrid day for our Indigenous community, and it's not something that they want to celebrate. So they wanted to remove that association from Australia Day altogether. And of course, cricket is actually one of the sports in Australia that has the highest Indigenous representation.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and they've done, I can't remember the statistic exactly, but it's definitely one of the sports, in the top three that has the highest representation and has actually gotten the most Indigenous people into sport as well. So this is a big move coming from Cricket Australia. But, our government has kind of said, that's not your place to speak. But then, of course, other people have come forward and congratulated Cricket Australia for making this move. So that's one kind of controversy this year. Another controversy, again, a little bit related to sport, this time tennis. Margaret Court has been, this has kind of been leaked. It's normally not revealed this early. But Margaret Court, who is an iconic Australian tennis player, she actually has a court named after her in Melbourne, where the Australian Open is played. However, she has actually been nominated to become the companion in the General Division of the Australian Order. So currently she is an officer of the Australian Order, but she has now been kind of put in the honour list this Australia Day to be kind of given the highest award level possible in Australia. Now, to this piece of news, a lot of people have shared their opinions, and there's been a lot of backlash around the fact that Margaret Court herself, who, because of her certain religious beliefs and her comments and maybe some, as some people would say, un-Australian views towards the LGBTIQ community, is not deserving of this honour.
And that she also had made her stance against same-sex marriage pretty clear.
Yeah. So because of her kind of, exactly because of that stance as well, and just kind of her openly religious views, people are saying that, it's not a tennis great's place to be given this highest order of Australia, when she's already gotten the kind of officer recognition.
Where basically that if she's not showing Australian views, and Australian views in the modern society are that we are inclusive, we are diverse, we're multicultural, but also just different people. We celebrate differences in everyone. And for Margaret Court to sort of have these views that aren't necessarily matching the modern Australia, then why is she deserving of the highest order, or had the highest order possible from Australia?
Yeah, no, I think you put it really well there. So again, I mean, it begs the question. Again, this year, like we said, is an example of how every year there'll always be something around Australia Day, and Australia Day has historically always been a controversial day, and people have different ways that they like to celebrate or commemorate this day, and I think we have to respect kind of all aspects of Australia Day and just accept the fact that, yeah, it is a controversial day and there's nothing that we can do to change it, and it will probably be quite controversial going into the future every year. Like, I don't see an end to it, and especially you raise the point around, will the name Australia Day ever change? Will the date change?
Will the date change? Will the name change?
You know, there's been so many proposals for a different date. I think May 8th, mate. That's one of them.
I really like May.
I like May too.
My personal vote.
I like having a public holiday later on in the year. But yeah, look, there's lots of considerations that go into it, and different people always have different views, but I think, yeah, I have accepted the fact that Australia Day is always going to have controversy around it, and it's really important to be aware of the controversy around it, or you know, the questions that are raised each year, because it's really relevant to our history and who we will be going forward as well.
Yeah, I think that they're very valid concerns, and it's no surprise that it is a hurtful day for a lot of our Indigenous peoples, and you know, why should we be celebrating hurting people? So yeah,
exactly. But looking forward, actually no, not looking forward, looking back at some of our Indigenous people and the Indigenous community, and I think what we wanted to do is not just look at current Australia, but look at historic Australia, and specifically look at some historic figures or iconic Australians that have kind of shaped Australia to be what it is today.
So the first person that I wanted to talk about is someone who is called Eddie Koiki Mabo. And Eddie Koiki Mabo was a Torres Strait Islander who believed that the Australian laws on land ownership were wrong, and he fought to change them.
And am I correct in saying that the laws, or the understanding, was this terra nullius?
Yes. So basically, when the British arrived to Australia, they declared that Australia was terra nullius, which translates to empty land, or land that belongs to nobody. As a result, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's occupation of and unique connection with the land were not recognised, and the British took the land from them without agreement or payment. So Eddie Koiki Mabo, he was born in 1936 in the Torres Strait Islands, and when he was growing up there, he saw that life there was strictly regulated with the laws that were made by the Queensland government, and he knew that in his heart he believed that the land that he lived on and was born into belonged to the Torres Strait Islander people, because they had lived there for thousands of years.
60,000 years, I think, around, yeah.
But the Australian government at the time also believed that it owned the land. So in 1981, Eddie Mabo made a speech at James Cook University in Queensland, where he explained his people's beliefs about the ownership and inheritance of the land. A lawyer heard this speech and asked Eddie if he would like to challenge the Australian government in the court system to decide who the true owner of the land were. So the background is that the Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people lived in Australia for 40 to 60,000 years before the British arrived in 1788. They spoke their own languages, they had their own laws and customs, and they also had a very strong connection to country, the Australian land. So when the British came, they did not recognise the unique connection that the Indigenous peoples had with their land. So when Mabo challenged the Australian government, his case ran for 10 years. And on 3rd of June 1992, the High Court of Australia decided that terra nullius should not have been applied to Australia. This decision recognised that the Indigenous peoples have rights to their lands, rights that existed before the British arrived, and rights that exist still to today. The Mabo decision was a turning point for the recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people's rights because it acknowledged their unique connection with the land, and it also led to the Australian Parliament passing the Native Title Act in 1993. Native title is the legal recognition that some Indigenous peoples have rights to and interests in certain land because of their traditional laws and customs. The rights granted by a native title are not unlimited. They depend on the traditional laws and customs of the people claiming the title. Sadly, Eddie Mabo never found out the result of his legal case. He died in January 1992, just 5 months before the High Court made its decision.
But I think this decision, we see it play out in our everyday lives today because any kind of function, any kind of event, or we always acknowledge the Indigenous land that we're meeting on today.
Yeah, the traditional custodians and owners of this land, especially in Canberra.
In Canberra we're on Ngunnawal territory. In Melbourne or wherever you are, there's definitely some kind of historic or Indigenous influence on that land, and it's really important to acknowledge it.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is all kind of brought on by Eddie Mabo, but you never got to see, how much change that he actually made is really sad. But very iconic figure. Then and now, I would say. The next kind of iconic figure, and maybe someone that we can not relate to, but that we all know of a bit more, and he's been around more recently, is Steve Irwin, or nicknamed the Crocodile Hunter. He was an Australian zookeeper, television personality, wildlife expert, environmentalist, and conservationist. He achieved worldwide fame from the television series The Crocodile Hunter, an internationally broadcast wildlife documentary series that he co-hosted with his wife Terry, who was actually American. They also co-owned and operated Australia Zoo, founded by Irwin's parents in Queensland. He unfortunately passed away on 4th of September 2006 at the hands of wildlife. He was pierced in the chest by a stingray barb while filming in Australia's Great Barrier Reef. His death became international news and was met with expressions of shock and grief by fans and media. Since then, numerous parks, zoos, streets and asteroids have actually been named in his honour. His widow, Terry Irwin, with whom he had 2 children, Bindi, Sue Irwin and Robert Clarence, continue to operate Australia Zoo. And in fact, this actually came to my attention very recently. So in 2020, early 2020, so this time last year, it came to surface that the Irwin family, through the Australia Zoo, which their parents had Steve Irwin's parents had started, had actually saved over 90,000 animals. in their wildlife festival, including a rescue of almost a third of the koalas affected by the 2020 bushfire season. So I think it's really, Steve Irwin's passed now, unfortunately. However, his legacy still lives on, and I know his daughter Bindi Irwin and his wife Terry Irwin are still working hard, and just as hard as they would if he was around, to make sure that his legacy and his message and what he believed in is carried on throughout Australia. So I think, again, he's an icon, and he still and always will be.
Absolutely. I was actually going to ask you, do you remember his death?
I remember seeing it on the news. He was on a boat, and it was very blue water, and it was all kind of like, people kind of knew that he was dead, but it was all, I think people still had hope. Yeah. Like, it was like, he's been stung, he was taken, he was like airlifted to hospital or something like that, and everyone was kind of hoping, praying, and people just couldn't imagine that, a lover of animals and a lover of wildlife could succumb to,
like a stingray barb. Like,
and he had battled crocodiles, I definitely remember, and it was just a shock.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, my parents connected to him, and they knew him and they loved him.
Yeah, I remember, because I was 12 then, and I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, he died doing something that he loved. Yeah,
that's also very true.
Yeah. I thought that was, like, as sad as it was, and, he passed too soon as well.
Yeah. But I think he's given his children a really good upbringing. And,
he lives on in their memories.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So someone a little bit different.
Yeah, because the first two people that we spoke about are people who were, in a sense, seen as heroes of their time.
Absolutely.
But the third person that we thought we would talk about is Ned Kelly.
Ned Kelly, the infamous Ned Kelly. Whenever I think of Ned Kelly, I think of the helmet that he wore with the slit. That's what I think of all the time.
That was his homemade armour.
His homemade armour. He was a bush,
He was one of the most famous bushrangers and Australian rural outlaws of the 19th century. He was a popular icon and a national identity. The background of Kelly is that he was born in December 1854 near the town of Beveridge in Victoria. When he was 12, his Irish father, John Red Kelly,
yes, there we go,
an ex-convict, died of dropsy, which forced Kelly at 12 to leave school and become the family breadwinner. Soon after, his mother moved the family to a slab hut in the tiny Victorian community of Greta to be near her own family, who were squatters. Greta was something of a lawless outpost, and soon young Kelly grew into an accomplished troublemaker. Having served a brief apprenticeship with the infamous bushranger Harry Power, Kelly formed his own gang, which was made up of him, his brother Dan, and his friends Joe Byrne and Steve Hart in 1878, and he fled to the bush, where his outlaw reputation flourished. After roaming the countryside and living off their wits, the Kelly gang shot dead 3 policemen who'd been sent to capture them, which sparked the biggest manhunt in Australia's history. Some viewed Ned Kelly as a personification of the plight of workers set against large landowners in an economically depressed period.
So he was kind of seen as
like a Robin Hood in a way.
Yeah.
Not that he was giving them up. Yeah, like a vigilante. He wasn't seen as a villain.
No, absolutely. Despite, having blood on his hands, he was still, and that's really surprising to hear. Yeah. What kind of Australia's perspective on outlaws or criminals was at the time.
Yeah, because we are a country that's a lot of people who came here from England were convicts. We are a penal colony.
You're very right.
We are a penal colony. That is very much our history. So more shootouts and skirmishes with police followed, and finally their luck ran out in the town of Glenrowan in northeast Victoria. After holding up the railway station, the Kelly gang herded the town citizens into the local inn, where they prepared for their last stand. In the back room, the clanking sounds of Kelly donning his homemade iron armour could be heard. The armour weighed 90 pounds or 45 kilograms.
Mm-hmm. That's heavy.
That's heavy.
That's very heavy, and it was all homemade.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the infamous
helmet.
So the police surrounded the inn, and at 3 a.m. they opened fire. After the smoke had cleared, 3 of the gang lay dead. However, Kelly escaped to the bush, only to come back at sunrise to try to rescue his brother.
Okay.
This time, the police aimed low and took out his legs with bullets, and at last Ned Kelly was captured. His preliminary hearing was in Beechworth Courthouse in August 1880, and in November, Kelly, aged only 25, mounted the gallows inside the old Melbourne jail. Moments before his death, Kelly reportedly uttered his famous last words, "Such is life." Today, Ned Kelly is indelibly stamped on the nation's psyche, part villain, part folk hero, but a man whose courage and defiance is uniquely Australian.
Australia is so broad and diverse and will continue to be.
You know, while since being federated, we are considered a young country. When we think about all of the history that not only the British convicts have had here, but the Indigenous history that we have had here, and also our ongoing future as a complete peoples together, what we should be focusing on is the here and now, as well as the future that we will build together, all as one.
Yes, I agree.
The background music used in the program were taken from albums Sound of Aboriginal Australia, Sharing Bush Secrets, Aboriginal Dreamtime, and Sitar Meditations. The updated 2021 Australian National Anthem was from YouTube, posted by Creative Trio. Bangla Radio Canberra sincerely and gratefully acknowledges the use of these pieces in this program.
We have now reached the end of our program. We hope that you have enjoyed tonight's program. We invite you to send your opinions of Bangla Radio Canberra to the following email, banglaradio@gmail.com. You're invited to follow Bangla Radio on Twitter and Facebook. If you join our Bangla Radio Facebook group, we will send you our weekly program description. The next Bangla Radio program will be broadcasted next Monday at 8 p.m. We welcome you to join us. Wherever you are, we hope that you stay well, in peace and happiness. Good night.